welcome back to another vlog. This is She-Ra, episodes 3 to 5. Raz, I don't remember the titles of the other two, sorry. But they're the episodes that introduce, in order, Raz, Perfuma, and Mermista. So, the first thing that jumps out at me about these episodes is that the characters they introduce are the least interesting parts of their respective episodes. I can't shake the feeling that this is a deliberate reference to the 80s She-Ra and its pilot movie, in which She-Ra was kind of a passive character, very much not the protagonist. She did some stuff while He-Man was captured, but otherwise it was his show for the pilot. So here we have these characters being introduced, and they're not really that big a deal at this stage. So we'll start with the first episode with Raz, and the more interesting part of that episode was, of course, the Glimmer and Adora elements. Glimmer having to deal with her mother, and us getting to meet her mother more fully than in the first episode. And honestly, having seen the whole series and rewatching it a couple times at this point, she's an interesting character. There's a lot going on there that isn't necessarily immediately apparent. At first she seems like the pretty typical mom in a teen thing, which is to say she's having trouble letting go, she's a little bit in the way, she's a little bit overprotective. But there's a reason for that. There's stuff going on with her. She is kind of alone. She is ruler of this kingdom. She has no interaction with anyone other than the main characters, ever. Pretty much the entirety of her interactions with Glimmer and rarely She-Ra. And of course, she's still dealing with blaming herself for her husband's death because she put him in danger. And she is thus deliberately trying to avoid doing the same thing with Glimmer, but Glimmer wants to be in the thick of things. So that's, is what it is. But it just adds a little bit more nuance to her than is normally the case for an adult in a teen-focused show. So that's her. And then you've got Adora, who is struggling to understand her powers, and kind of the whole point of this episode is Raz telling her, oh, you don't need me. You don't need a mentor. You already know what you need to know. And that's going to come back later. That's actually setting up foreshadowing for her rejecting what Light Hope tries to teach her, like, at the opposite end of the season. She's, for lack of a better term, righteous enough that she doesn't need to be told. She has an innate morality, which is why she rejected the Horde. And Raz is pretty much just there to remind her of that. And to remind her that previous generations aren't fonts of wisdom. They made mistakes. And it's a nice balance, actually, between her and Angela, who, is trying to make up for her mistakes, but in the process creating a new one. So, that's well done there. I don't... I don't know whether or not to say these 3 episodes are structured similarly. To an extent they are, in that they all have her meet a new character, then there's a horde attack, then she fights off the horde attack with the help of the new character. But there's a pretty significant difference in that she's the hero in the first and third of this set, episodes 3 and episode 5, but in the second episode, she's the one who gets rescued. But again, that's just kind of showcasing that Perfuma is stronger than she thinks, and that, you know, some battles have to be fought, which is definitely something worth saying, especially in the world we live in now. But it's still quite familiar. And so, much more interesting than that is everything going on in the Horde headquarters, which it's really cool that we get to see that much of it, and that Catra gets this much characterization. The scene where she shreds the bed and then cries is a powerful one. I actually can't remember if that was in episode 3 or 4. But I know that the whole deal with her and Shadow Weaver, and like the political maneuverings going on there, and Hordak, you know, keeping them on their toes with the surprise promotion. He's trying to keep control of a bunch of people that don't really have a common cause. They just have been told to be loyal. And he's doing this in fundamentally abusive ways. He's toying with them, spying on them, screwing with them. It's effective, but at the same time, it doesn't engender any actual loyalty, which creates exactly the kind of rebellions that he is trying to keep down. And we see that with both Catra and Shadow Weaver, and of course with Adora. But then again, it's kind of what makes the Horde the bad guys, is that they are just kind of out for their own gain. And just... Catra is such a fascinating character. She is easily the most interesting character in this show. She's played fantastically by AJ Michalka, who, of course, is also the voice of Stevani in Steven Universe. And, like, you can hear that voice in Catra, but at the same time, it's such a wildly different character, and it still fits so well. I guess I don't have that much to say on the second episode. The third is a little more interesting. Because it's, again... I think it's setting up... It feels like foreshadowing, but what it foreshadows isn't actually in this season. But we have glimpses of Adora being from somewhere else, somewhere where she can see the stars. And that was in episode 3 as well. We had that whole sequence of almost memories flickering past. When Adora saw the stars. She has seen that before, which means she is not from Eternia. And in episode 4, we see some more foreshadowing of later events in the season. When she heals the tree by destroying the Horde machine, that is her power to balance and rejuvenate the magical power sources that I'm blanking on what they're actually called. And that's kind of her function within the Magitech of Eternia. And so that's being foreshadowed as well. And then, so, 5th episode has her again doing something like that, but I think more interesting, and easily the most interesting thing in the episode, is of course not Mermista, although I love Mia Tsundere. I still can't justify claiming her as the most interesting thing in the episode. But there's, in addition to her, also there's Seahawk. Sorry, I was blanking on his name. And he is by far the most interesting thing in this episode. He's enormously fun. Just adds this much needed element of, not that the show has been lacking in levity, but he's just pure fun, personified. And it's great. He's, the lovable cad, the irrepressible adventurer. He's completely ridiculous, and his ships always end up catching on fire. He's such a cartoon character. But there's this reference to where he says, "where I come from," and talks wistfully about the crew he had. And it raises the question, well, where did he come from? Because where did he come from? There's not really anything to support this, but I don't know, I just feel like he is not from Eternia. I feel like, knowing what I know about the backstory of the old series, I feel like he is someone who fell into it and couldn't get back out. Because that's kind of Eternia's thing, is it's not really part of the regular universe anymore, and people who go in can't get back out. And that's where the Horde came from. That is where She-Ra came from. And I suspect still, there's enough to imply that that's still the case in this show, that it makes me wonder if that's also where Seahawk came from. Either way, this idea of where I come from, I had a crew, kind of reflects Adora. And, she's creating this new set of friends and allies, but she had one, and I'm certain there's some part of her that misses at least Catra, if not the rest of her squad. Probably her whole squad. There's honestly probably part of her that misses Shadow Weaver. But the really big introduction here, which is done kind of quietly, is Scorpio, who is introduced as just, this big, kind of goofy character who's very tough, but also kind of silly. I don't know if silly's too strong a word, but she's not as focused and serious as the Horde usually are depicted as. She's a little bit nicer, even while she is on the side of evil, and she serves it loyally, and she fights viciously. She straight up tries to murder Bo. Throw him into the engine. That's... Ugh. But she's so important later on to unraveling what the stones actually do, to forming that trio of her, Catra, and Entrapta, that ultimately, creates a situation for the season finale. So again, something major being introduced here, but it's not really... It's being done so relatively subtly, so on a first viewing, you don't realize that this is a character who's going to be pivotal. You think, oh, Catra has a comic relief sidekick. I think, though, that's about it. yeah, I don't think I have anything else. So yeah, that's about it. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Check out my Patreon for early access to Let's Plays, vlogs, essays, and more. And I'll see you all next time. Bye!